Hey Rick, how are ya?
Hey, Gracie, good to see you again. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Good, good.
So today I was wondering if you could walk us through something I've heard you talk about with your members, the
Yeah.
leadership circle.
Wonderful. Absolutely. The Leadership Circle, it is a 360 instrument that I use with all of my executive coaching work. And it's a very powerful instrument that gives me a lot of data about the individual. And the individual learns a lot because not only do they see their self score, but they see how other people that they work with scores them relative to their leadership. So it's a great tool. What I'd like to do is just kind of walk through this slide deck and go through some of the key concepts.
Let's do
So
it.
yeah, so let me start. So Bob Anderson is the person who developed the Leadership Circle. I had the good fortune of working with Bob back in 2006, 2007, when I was certified in the instrument. It was a fairly new instrument at the time, but it's worldwide now, and it's highly correlated to high performing organizations and high performing leaders. So it's a very valuable tool. And Bill Adams is the CEO, and Bill runs the shop, great guy. And so both Bill and Bob have written two books that you see here, Mastering Leadership and then Scaling Leadership. So let me give you some of the highlights. This is the Leadership Circle. And so what we're trying to help every leader to understand is how do they move from the bottom half of the circle, which are called reactive leadership uh, styles or behaviors, to the top half of the circle, which are proactive or creative leadership styles, behaviors, and competencies. The data shows that as a person moves their leadership to the top half, they become much more powerful leaders. And and what this image does, this summary graphic, it helps them to understand where they reside, where they're spending time as a leader, both where they think they're spending time, which is the black line, or the heavy line, and then how others perceive them, which is the shaded part of each of these competency wedges. And then we get to compare the difference. So that's it as an overview. Let me talk a bit about the two frameworks of leaders, two mindsets, so to speak. And when I'm working with people, I'm listening for which mindset people are coming from. So the one on the left is called the problem reacting mindset. It starts with a problem or threat that creates fear. And what happens when we have fear? We react. So we get into this cycle of problem, threat, fear, and reaction. And when this continues, people are able to get things resolved. But guess what happens after your issue is resolved? We kind of take a big sigh of relief and we're waiting for the next threat to occur. So the results, both organizationally and personally, are really a flat line. And you can see that in the bottom graphic. We have our ups and downs, but we really don't improve overall results. As opposed to a different mindset or framework, and that's the outcome creating mindset, where we have a purpose and vision, we are passionate about achieving that purpose and vision, and that's how we take action rather than reaction. So it's thoughtful action. So again, purpose, vision, passion, and leads to action. And the results here are, yes, you have your ups and downs, but that the overall results over time is one of achieving a vision and purpose, a strategy, objectives and goals with passionate, positive energy through well thought through action. So it's a very different mindset. And guess what? 75% of the time, we're working ourselves out of the reactive mindset, not the creative mindset. So how do we make this shift as a leader? The other valuable aspect of this instrument is that it's really covering three core leadership assessment categories. So we oftentimes think of competencies. What am I able to do? What do I know? And what am I able to exhibit in terms of my behaviors? The leadership circle measures that, and we'll be going into those. Other instruments that you've probably heard of that also measure competencies are benchmarks, PDI, or Lominger. The second category are the assumptions we bring. And so the assumptions are what is our self-awareness? What are the assumptions we make about ourselves as a person, as a leader, and kind of bring into our day-to-day lives? And so those underlying assumptions are oftentimes measured through the Hogan instrument or FIRO-B or emotional intelligence instruments. And so this is a very powerful part of knowing who you are and how you lead. But again, the leadership circle measures both competencies and assumptions, not just one or the other. And then the third area of leadership assessment that the instrument measures is personality, style, or type inventories. This is where people find it helpful to know, how am I different than my teammates? How am I different than my clients or my customers? How is it they're thinking in a very different way than I'm thinking? Or they're reacting or acting in a very different way than I'm acting. And so other instruments that typically get to the style personality measurements are Myers-Briggs and DISC. Again, these are all powerful tools, but they're measuring one type of leadership assessment. The leadership circle measures all three. And this is why I find it a really powerful tool, because we're able to weave the three areas of leadership assessment into one. So through one instrument, we're able to understand what's going on with a particular individual. How are they behaving? How are they being perceived in terms of their leadership behavior? Why is that going on? And finally, what's the underlying personality type? And that's what leads for pathways for change or action planning. So it's a really, really cool tool in that respect. So I want to talk a little more around the detail of the two halves of the circle: the reactive half, the bottom half, and the creative half, or proactive half on the top. And we're gonna dive into the competencies between these two halves of the circle. So when you look at the top half of the circle, it has creative competencies that are broken into 5 different dimensions. The first is relating. The second is self-awareness. The third is authenticity. That's the middle wedge. The fourth is systems awareness. And the fifth is achieving. I want to save authenticity for last, because I see it really kind of as a summary of the other 4. So as you look at the relating dimensions, what are the leadership competencies? Well, it's you have caring connections, you foster team play, you're a collaborator, you're mentoring and developing others, and you have interpersonal intelligence. Core competencies for an effective leader. What are the dimensions? What are the competencies of self-awareness? That you're a selfless leader. It's not about you, it's about others. That you have a balance, a work-life balance, and other aspects of life that are balanced, and people perceive that. You have composure or executive presence, and that you're a learner. People want to have an executive who is learning themselves, but also helping them to learn. Let's skip over to systems awareness. The competencies there is you're concerned about the big picture. How is it our company is making a difference in the world? So that's community concern. How are we making a difference in the marketplace? That your sustainable productivity, it's not a flash in the pan, a one-time thing. It's sustainable productivity over time, and that you're a systems thinker. You're able to put all the pieces together. So, and understand how they fit and they're aligned. Core competencies for an effective leader. The fourth area that I want to touch on is achievement orientation, that you're achieving. And the four competencies there are a strategic focus. You have a clear purpose and vision that you're able to articulate to your people and your customers. You achieve results, and you're decisive. And if you do those things well, guess what? You're going to be seen as an authentic leader, one with high integrity, so you do what you say, and one of courageous authenticity, which is meaning you're willing to take smart risks, and people see you as someone who's willing to step out into the future and take us to new places. So that's the top half of the circle. The bottom half of the circle has three-dimensional areas, and I want to speak to those. What are the competencies for each of those? So if you look at the complying dimension, the competencies are you're conservative. I would replace the word conservative with cautious, sometimes overly cautious. That you're pleasing. It's all about making other people happy. That you have a high sense of needing to belong. That's what's driving you to lead in certain ways and take certain actions, is a sense of belonging. And the fourth competency there is that you're passive. What you'll see is these are they have some of the weakest correlations to high performing leadership, are the complying behaviors or competencies. The second dimension is called protecting competencies. This is where we oftentimes go, strictly to the mind. I find a lot of professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, people who have professional degrees who maybe fall back to their profession, oftentimes get caught in the protecting mode. And this is where people are putting up walls or distancing themselves from others, perhaps overly critical of what they see and hear. And how does that come through? It comes through as being arrogant. And so when people score high in the protecting competencies, what I'll oftentimes be looking for is how are we falling back on what we know rather than what we want to achieve and how we want to engage with others. So it's that inside versus outside. The controlling dimension are your classics, that someone is seen as being autocratic, overly ambitious, just, driven, so they'll run over your back to get there, or a perfectionist. Perfectionism is actually a form of reactive leadership. And so when you look at the bottom half of the circle, these are the competencies that correlate to the lowest levels of leadership behavior. So let me talk about the left and right half of the circle. So when you look at the leadership circle results, you'll see some folks tend to have a lot more shading on the left, which means they're relationship oriented versus task oriented, and some you'll see are much more task oriented people. So this is the other thing we look for. But what we want to do is understand all four quadrants of the leadership circle, and how do we move people from the bottom half to the top half to have creative relationships and creative task competencies and capabilities and behaviors as opposed to reactive. So let me talk a bit about what's underneath the leadership circle. And the leadership circle, Bob Anderson designed the circle around adult development theory. Robert Keegan was really kind of the author of much of this. I've used other people as well. And the underlying the leadership circle and our move from reactive to proactive, or creative is where we are in our adult development as leaders. And so the first is egocentric. And the egocentric mind is, think of a child, think of someone, 6 years of age or under. It's all about them. What can I get? Ooh, there's a toy over there. I want that toy. And so the egocentric is the first stage, and we all go through that. The second stage is the reactive stage. It is the one that is represented on the bottom half of the circle. It is one of where we are 75% of the time. And about 70% of all leaders really never leave the reactive stage. They're functioning from the reactive behaviors all of the time. And our goal is to move people from reactive to creative, to the top half of the circle. And this is what Bob calls the hero's journey. The hero's journey is going from reactive to creative, from reactive to proactive. And in a moment, I'll show you the correlation to high-performing leadership and results. Now, there are two additional levels that Robert Keegan identified. One is called integral, and so for those who are primarily leading from the creative top half of the circle, there's really another level, and that is one of being integral. And the integral leader is one who understands the whole and has gone beyond just what they think the right thing to do is and the right way to lead is, and they're really looking at what's best for the world, what's best for our whole marketplace. And then the unitive stage is very rare. That is that's your Martin Luther Kings, your Gandhis, your Nelson Mandelas, people whose really their very existence is one of in service to the world. So what we're about is going from reactive to creative, and then from creative to integral. So when you think about that move, some key components are, when you're in the reactive space, it's what Keegan and others call the socialized mind. And that means somewhere in our teenage years, we realize we can actually get ahead and we can get more of what we want if we follow the rules. If we understand, what do our parents really want us to do? What do the teachers want us to do? What's the boss want me to do? So our society spends a lot of time and energy shaping us for about 25 years, 20 years anyway, in being understanding of and responsive to and shaped by what others think we should do. And hopefully we learn to do that well. But you know what? 75% of the folks get stuck there. So what we want to do as a powerful, effective leader is move beyond what other people think we should do to being self-authored. And the self-authored mind is one where we shed what others people think, and we determine for ourselves what we stand for, what we know the right thing to do is, where I think we can achieve success. And we bring that to our companies. We bring that into our leadership. And those who are in the self-authored space are saying, here's our purpose, here's our vision, and yeah, you're right, nobody else is doing it, and that's why I want to do it. So moving into that self-authored mindset, for some people it happens early in life, and other people it never happens. But it's always a journey. And that's what I'm looking for when I'm working with my executives. That's the kind of movement we're trying to achieve. When you go to the integral level, it's what they call the self-transforming mind. And so it's really when you've achieved that self-authored mindset, when you determine for yourself what the right thing to do is and where you want to, how you want to lead and where you want to take your company, that's great. But then you start to realize, there is that other viewpoint. And it's to understand that other viewpoint and to bring that into your thinking and to learn from that and to say, I can be who I want to be. I can create the company, and we can create a company that's achieving what we want it to achieve, and at the same time recognize there's another point of view, and perhaps learn from that, and respect that. So that's the self-transforming mind. So the most of our work in the leadership circle, why I encourage all of my CEOs to take it, what I bring into our executive coaching work, is that hero's journey, the reactive to the creative space. About 80% of all leaders are in the socialized mindset. 15% make it to the self-authored mindset and really live out of that space. Many more are stepping their toe into it. My job is to help you move into that space. And then about 5% really go beyond that, and their real purpose is, how do I change the world? How do I make a dramatic difference in the world? We have some leaders who really are driven that way. Now, how does it correlate to results? In terms of effective leadership, 5 core measures of effective leaders, here's the results. About 40% of the reactive leaders are considered effective. 65% of the creative leaders are considered high performing, and 90% of the integral leaders are perceived as being high performing. So what are those measures? It's these 5 things. I'm satisfied with the quality of leadership this person provides. This is the kind of leader that others should aspire to become. This leader is an example of an ideal leader. This leader's leadership helps this organization to thrive. And overall, this leader provides very effective leadership. That's the correlation for each of the competencies. And you can see some of the strongest correlations for high-performing leadership. Number 1 is I have a clear purpose and vision. Number 2 is that I focus on fostering team play. Kind of things we already know, but here's the data to back it up. And then you can see how powerful the other top competencies are. What are the least effective leadership competencies? The lowest correlation to effective leadership is being passive. The second lowest is distancing yourself from others, showing arrogance, being autocratic. So if those things are showing up for you in terms of feedback from others, how do we move you to a different place? This is what a top 10% aggregate, if you look across Bob's leadership circle database, the bottom 10% looks like the left, the top 10% looks like the right. Another interesting data point is not just where the shading is, but what do the other individuals think of themselves in their own leadership? Notice on the left, people think they're better than what other people perceive when it comes to the creative leadership competencies, and lower than what other people perceives on the reactive competencies. So when I'm working with individuals, I'm talking about that gap. We're talking about, well, why is it you perceive yourself as having, a 40% strategic focus, but others see you at less than 20%? Let's talk about that. And then the same with the people on the right-hand side. You can see they typically underscore themselves compared to how others perceive them. And sometimes that can actually get in the way, where they need to be stepping more into who they actually are, and really being more forthcoming in their leadership. And they'll see themselves scoring even higher in the authenticity dimension. So those are the averages. I want to share this slide because I think it's important to say we all have our roots in the reactive. This is a developmental model. So no matter how high you score in the creative side, you know how to come back down, and you know how to be autocratic. You know how to be arrogant when you think that's the right thing to do. You know when to be passive, when that's pleasing. So it's not right or wrong, it's choice. And there are times when very strong, creative, self-authored leaders may choose to come down and come across in a more traditional way. Those are choice points. What I'll oftentimes talk about with my leaders is, let's go to the balcony, let's look at your behavior, let's talk about what is the appropriate action. And so that's how we build self-awareness. We want to look at, how am I typically behaving? And then, rather than just behaving subconsciously with what you kind of think knows, it's worked for me in the past, let's pause and let's think about, is that the right behavior? And do I want to choose a different kind of behavior or competency? So I love this tree model. It's an important one. One last thing I'd like to cover, Grayce, is on the left-hand side is what we've been talking about. This is the individual leader report and profile. The right-hand side is a different instrument, very similar, that I've used with a number of my CEOs, that measures what the organization thinks about your senior leadership team. So we'll actually put the instrument out and we'll say, what is your perception of your senior leadership team in all these dimensions? And that's the shaded score. And then, where would you like them to be? And that's the bold line. So it's a little bit different dimension. Where are your senior leaders? And we actually list them by name. Where are these people as a collective leadership group? And then, where do you want them to be? So another very powerful tool. And one of my CEOs actually used this in his strategy session. It was his idea to take the first half day of a 2.5-day strategy workshop and focus on the leadership circle, both in terms of self, but also their team scores. And so then, as they went into the next 2 days of building out their strategy and specific action plans, they kept coming back to saying, and are we the people to do it? Do we have the right kind of, are we approaching our leadership in a way that's going to achieve those leadership objectives? I thought it was a really powerful way to use the tool. So, Grayce, that's the leadership circle. I would be glad to speak to anyone about it. And I'd look forward to using this with all of my CEOs. It's a great tool.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick.
You're welcome.